Let me tell you something about the Interstellar Combat Academy on planet Vorlag. It is not a school, not really. Schools have warm lighting and counselors who ask you how your feelings are doing. The academy has fluorescent battle lights that flicker during combat drills, corridors that smell like burned synthetic armor, and a counselor who retired after his third student was carried out on a stretcher. He said he needed a career with less emotional weight. He now sells decorative rocks on a moon somewhere. Good for him. The academy sits on the edge of the Vorlag Highlands, where the wind comes in sideways and the temperature drops fast enough to remind you that the universe does not particularly care about your comfort. The building itself is enormous, all sharp angles and dark metal designed to look intimidating from every direction. Whoever designed it succeeded completely. I feel intimidated just describing it. The architecture alone has probably broken 3 cadets psychologically. Every species in the known coalition sends their best cadets here. The Krillians come with their 6-jointed limbs and their perfect memory systems, able to recall every combat technique ever recorded. The Tavari arrive in their pressure suits, tall and pale and deeply serious about everything, including lunch. The Moradins send their warrior caste youth, heavy-built and mean-tempered, the kind of people who solve most problems by walking toward them very quickly. And then there are the instructors. Most of them are terrifying in the usual ways. High-rank, impressive records, the kind of professional distance that says, "I have seen things, and I will not be discussing them with you." They walk the halls, and students step aside automatically, the way you step aside for something large and unpredictable moving in your direction. But Professor Kelthos is in a category that does not share walls with the other instructors. He is Vorathi by species, which means he stands at roughly 3 meters tall, built like something that decided bones were optional and replaced them with dense structural muscle. His coloring is deep gray with patterns of darker gray across his neck and shoulders, which on a Vorathi signals a combat history so extensive that the patterns have layered over each other twice. His eyes are gold, not metaphorically gold, actually gold, and they move independently. Clear's throat, which means he can watch 2 separate threats at the same time while appearing to look at neither. He has 12 documented kills in active service. He does not put that on his office wall. He does not need to. Everyone already knows. His class is called Practical Combat Engagement. The course description in the Academy catalog reads, "A hands-on approach to real-world threat neutralization across species-specific combat scenarios." What that description politely does not mention is that the scenarios are real. The threats are real. And the medical wing has a standing arrangement with Professor Kelthos that involves pre-cleared beds and a reduced paperwork process. Every semester, a fresh batch of cadets looks at that course listing and thinks, how bad can it be, really? I was one of those cadets. I know exactly how bad it can be. I am Vensorath Junior Cadet, Tavari Species, second-year student at the Academy, and narrator of this particular disaster. I say disaster with full awareness that it did not end in disaster. It ended in something far stranger. But at the time, sitting in that classroom on the first day of practical combat engagement, looking at Professor Kelthos, standing at the front of the room like a monument to bad decisions, disaster felt like the only reasonable outcome available. There were 31 cadets in the class that semester. 28 of them were what you would expect. Sharp, trained, physically impressive specimens from species with strong combat traditions. The Krellians had 3 representatives, all top of their assessment scores. The Moradins sent 5, and those 5 alone raised the average muscle density of the room by a measurable percentage. There were Solvari, Drexy, a pair of Orath siblings who trained together and moved like they shared one nervous system. And then there were the humans. 3 of them. They sat together near the middle of the room, which I found interesting. Most species clustered toward the back on the first day of a class like this, in the ancient and universal hope that distance from the instructor provides some form of protection. The humans sat in the middle. Either they had no idea what they were in for, or they were making a strategic choice about visibility. I could not tell which, and that bothered me slightly. The first human was Doyle Fracas. He was large by human standards, broad in the shoulders, with a face that looked permanently skeptical, like the universe had been making promises to him his whole life and delivering poorly on all of them. He had his arms crossed when he sat down and kept them that way for most of the first session. He looked like someone who had decided to be unimpressed before anything happened, which was honestly a reasonable stance. The second was Petra Voss. She was shorter, faster in her movements, the kind of person who seems to be calculating something even when they are doing nothing. She had a habit of tapping one finger against her knee when she was listening, a rhythm nobody else seemed to notice. I noticed because I was sitting 2 rows back and slightly to the left, and I noticed things. It is both my strength and my source of constant low-level anxiety. The third human was the one nobody really looked at, Mira Shen. She was not remarkable in any visible way. Medium height for a human, which is short by most other species' standards. Slim. She had dark hair pulled back simply, and eyes the color of old wood, brown with quiet depth. She carried herself without any particular announcement. She did not have Doyle's defensive posture or Petra's electrical alertness. She just sat there, settled, like she had already made peace with whatever was going to happen, and was simply waiting for it to begin. The Moradin cadets looked at the humans and whispered something among themselves. I speak enough Moradin to understand it. They said the humans looked like they had been sent to the wrong building and had not figured it out yet. I did not say anything in response. I was in survival mode. The entire class was in survival mode. You do not waste energy on commentary when Professor Kelthos is about to walk through the door. He walked through the door. 31 cadets went quiet so fast you could hear the ventilation system. Kelthos stood at the front of the room and looked at us. Not spoke. Not introduced himself. Just looked, slowly taking inventory. His gold eyes moved in their independent way, which meant he was technically looking at 2 different students simultaneously at all times, and every student felt like the one being evaluated. It was an incredibly effective classroom management technique. I do not recommend experiencing it. You are here, he said finally, his voice coming out low and even, because your respective academies believe you have potential. He paused. I do not yet share that belief. Welcome to practical combat engagement. The first 2 weeks were theory sessions, and I want to be honest with you. They were not easy theory sessions. They were the kind of theory that lands on your desk like a physical object and dares you to lift it. Threat assessment across multiple attack vectors, adaptive response protocols for environments without stable gravity, behavioral prediction models for non-sentient combat organisms. None of it was light reading. The humans kept up. I watched because I was curious, and because watching other species process information is genuinely interesting to me. Doyle struggled with the mathematical sections, but worked through them with a determination that was almost loud, even in silence. Petra absorbed everything quickly and asked precise questions that occasionally made Kelthos pause before answering, which was not something I had seen happen before. Mira said almost nothing in class. She took notes by hand, which was unusual, and she read everything twice. I know she read everything twice because I happened to see her note structure during a session break. She had a system. Everything read once for comprehension, summarized in her own phrasing in the margins, then the relevant sections flagged for a second pass. It was an extremely organized method for someone sitting in the middle of the room looking like she was just quietly existing. Nobody else noticed this about her. The Morodane cadets were still operating on their original assessment. The Krellians had determined the humans ranked below average on initial response metrics and had filed them away accordingly in whatever perfect recall system runs their social judgment. Even Doyle and Petra, her own species, seemed to treat her mostly as familiar background. Mira Shen moved through those first 2 weeks like furniture that occasionally asked a clarifying question. This was, as it turned out, a catastrophic misread, but we did not know that yet. On the first day of the third week, Professor Kelso walked into the room, set nothing down on the desk because he never carried anything, and said 4 words. Live assessment. Today. Now. The room changed temperature. Not literally, but if you had a sensor measuring the collective anxiety output of 31 cadets, it would have spiked so hard it might have broken the equipment. The theoretical portion of this course, Kelso continued, moving around the front of the room in that slow way he had, is finished. You have read the materials. You have studied the protocols. You have told me on paper what you would do in a combat situation with a live organism. He stopped. He looked at us. Today, we find out if any of that was true. Someone behind me made a sound. I will not identify the species because it was a sound of genuine distress, and I have some mercy. The Academy maintains several combat organisms for assessment purposes, Kelso said. Today, one will be brought to the arena. 1 volunteer will enter. The objective is not to kill. The objective is engagement, control, and survival. Time limit is 8 minutes. He paused again. He was very good at pauses. Each one landed like a dropped weight. I will take 1 volunteer now. The rest of you will observe. He looked at the class. The class looked at their desks. Now, I want to describe what the Gorath actually is, because it is important for you to understand what exactly everyone was declining to volunteer for. The Gorath is a creature native to the lower jungle regions of Dresha 4, a planet that Earth scientists would classify as extremely hostile to everything, and most other species would classify as a mistake. The Gorath stands about 2 meters at the shoulder on all 6 limbs, though it can rear up to nearly 4 meters when it is feeling theatrical about something, which is often. Its exterior is covered in layered plates that have evolved specifically to deflect energy weapons, which tells you everything you need to know about the neighborhood it comes from. It has 4 sensory organs that function differently from each other, meaning you cannot blind it with light or disorient it with sound because it has backup systems for both. It does not have a particular appetite for anything specific. It attacks what moves. It attacks what smells like a threat. It attacks what makes sounds it does not recognize. It attacks, on at least 2 documented occasions, things that simply looked at it the wrong way. The Academy's Gorath had put 12 students in the medical wing over 4 years. Not dead. The Academy has a policy about student mortality that involves significant administrative consequences, but hospitalized. Broken bones, torn connective tissue, 1 memorable case of a Morodin cadet with 3 times the average species body density who was thrown the full width of the arena and embedded in the padding on the far wall. He recovered. He also transferred programs. This is what Kelso was offering the class a chance to experience. Silence. The Krellians appeared to be rereading their notes from the previous session, which they had already memorized perfectly, suggesting the note review was purely theatrical. The Morodane cadets, who had come into this class looking like they wanted to fight something, were suddenly finding the floor composition of the arena very interesting. The Drexy pair had developed, simultaneously, what appeared to be a coughing condition that required all of their attention. Doyle Fracas had uncrossed his arms and was crossing them again in the other direction. Petra Voss had stopped her knee tapping. Her finger was perfectly still, which I had learned in 2 weeks was her version of genuine alarm. Kelso began to walk between the desks slowly, the long way around. He was watching everyone's face, and I am certain enjoying the results. This was sport for him, not cruelty, exactly. More like an instructor who knows that pressure is information, and he was gathering information right now. He passed the Moradin row. Nobody moved. He passed the Krellians. The note reviewing intensified. He passed me. I looked directly forward and thought about being somewhere else. He passed Doyle and Petra. He reached Mira, and Mira Shen raised her hand, not quickly, not with any performance. Her hand came up the way someone raises their hand to ask what time the cafeteria closes. Calm, simple, done. The classroom went a kind of quiet that is different from regular quiet. Regular quiet is just the absence of sound. This was the presence of 30 people simultaneously stopping every small movement they were making, every breath they were adjusting. Every unconscious fidget just stopped. The room did not go quiet. The room held its breath. Kelthos stopped walking. He looked at Mira Shen. For 4 seconds, he did not speak. Now, 4 seconds does not sound like a long time, but in a Vorathi communication context, 4 seconds of silence from a superior after a subordinate action means one specific thing: total, genuine surprise. Vorathi are not slow processors. Kelso does not pause to think. He pauses to choose what to say, and even that takes him maybe a second maximum. 4 seconds of silence from Kelso meant that for the first time in what was probably a very long time, something had happened that he had not predicted. The Moradin cadets were staring at Mira with expressions that, translated across species, meant approximately, "Is she aware of what she just did?" The Krellians had abandoned the note reviewing entirely. Doyle Fracas turned to look at Mira with an expression I can only describe as deeply respectful concern. Petra Voss was perfectly still, but her eyes were bright and sharp, and she was watching Kelso, not Mira. "Smart move, Petra," Kelso said. "Cadet Shen." "Yes, Professor," Mira said. "You are volunteering for the live assessment." "Yes, Professor." He looked at her for another 2 seconds. Then he said, "Report to the arena at the 3rd bell." He turned and walked back to the front of the room, and something in his posture had shifted by a fraction of a degree that I cannot precisely explain, but that I noticed, and that made me very, very interested in what was going to happen next. The 3rd bell came 40 minutes later, and the entire class walked to the arena together because Kelso had told us we were all observing. The walk was unlike any walk I had taken in the academy. Normally, there is conversation, complaint, the usual species group clustering and social maneuvering. This walk was mostly silence and the kind of sideways glances that species give each other when they have all collectively agreed to feel something, and have not yet agreed on what. The arena was a large circular space with a high ceiling, padded walls on the lower sections, and observation rails along the upper tier where we all positioned ourselves. The floor was sealed material that was easier to clean than it was pleasant to think about why that mattered. There were 2 entry points, one for the cadet, one for the creature. Mira through the cadet gate and walked to the center of the arena. She wore her standard training suit, the same thing everyone wore, no additional equipment. She did not bring anything. She stood in the center of the arena, and she looked around at it the way you look around at a new room you are trying to understand. Not afraid, just assessing. Doyle was at the rail next to me. He was gripping it. He would not admit to gripping it if you asked him directly, and I respect that. Kelthos stood at the observer level on the far side watching. The creature gate opened. The Gorath came out. I have read about Gorath. I had seen the classification documents and the incident reports. None of that prepared me adequately for what a Gorath looks like when it is moving in a real space and is actively interested in you. It was enormous. Not in the way you think when someone says an animal is large, in the way that takes your brain a moment to accept. It filled a section of the arena with its presence in a way that made the arena feel smaller than it was. Its plated surface caught the overhead light and scattered it dully. It moved with 6 limbs in a rolling gait that was faster than it had any right to be at that size, and when it turned its sensory cluster toward the center of the arena and located Mira Shen standing there, it made a sound that went through the floor and through the rail and through my hands and settled somewhere unpleasantly in my chest. Mira looked at it. The Gorath looked at Mira in its way, all 4 sensory organs orienting toward her, and then it charged. Not a test charge, not a territorial warning, a full, direct, committed charge at the small human standing in the middle of the arena. The floor shook. The sound of 6 heavy limbs in rapid contact with sealed material was like a percussion sequence with no musical value and considerable threat value. Mira moved. She did not move in the direction most species move when something enormous is accelerating toward them. She did not sprint for the walls. She did not attempt to climb anything. She moved to the side slightly, and then she moved toward the beast instead of away from it, which caused Doyle next to me to make a sound that a pressurized container makes when it is close to a critical threshold. The Gorath's first pass missed her by a margin that I am going to describe as uncomfortable, because calling it what it actually was, which was just barely enough, would have made the situation feel too real to describe calmly. The creature turned. It was fast turning. The creature reports always mention the turning speed, and reading it, and seeing it in the same moment produced in me a new respect for accuracy in creature documentation. Mira was breathing hard already. The initial movement had cost her something. She was rolling her left shoulder in a way that suggested the wind pressure from the pass had caught her, or she had clipped something. She was injured slightly before the real contact had even begun. A Morodan cadet beside me said something under his breath that translated roughly to it is already over. It was not already over. Mira watched the Gorath reorient. She did not watch it the way a person watches something they are afraid of. She watched it the way I have seen engineers watch a mechanical system they are diagnosing, looking for the pattern, looking for the rhythm. Her head moved slightly, tracking, and I realized she had already identified something because her body position shifted in a subtle way before the creature moved again. The second charge came differently. The Gorath adjusted its approach angle, which was more sophisticated behavior than most cadets expected from it. Mira adjusted in response. She let it come closer this time, which was either a calculated decision or the most alarming mistake I had ever watched happen in real time. At the last possible moment, she dropped her center of gravity and went sideways under the leading limb, and the creature passed over her, and she came up behind it and she hit it. She hit it with her forearm across the lower sensory cluster, a short, sharp, driving strike that targeted specifically the region between the 3rd and 4th sensory organ, which, from the course materials I knew, was the highest density nerve junction point on the Gorath body structure. The Gorath did not go down, but it missed its next step. It stumbled, just once, just slightly, just for a fraction of a second. Every cadet at the rail made a noise. Kelthos said nothing. Mira had already moved again. She was circling now, keeping movement, never still. The Gorath relocated her and charged a 3rd time, and this time it connected. Its leading limb caught her across the midsection and sent her sliding across the arena floor 12 feet in a direction she had not chosen. She hit the padding on the wall and left a dent. Silence at the rail. Mira got up, not fast, not dramatically. She got up the way you get up when getting up is simply the next thing that needs to happen, and you are going to do it, because that is the sequence. She took a breath. She rolled her neck. She looked at the Gorath, and she started talking to it. I want to be very precise here because I know how this sounds. She did not talk to it in any linguistic sense. She used sound and posture. in a combination that I had never seen before, and that I later understood was something humans call in their own species research behavioral mirroring with vocal overlay used in their own world when dealing with large non-sentient predators. Low sounds, specific registers, body language that was simultaneously non-threatening and non-retreating. The Gorath's charge speed dropped slightly on the fourth approach. The Morodin cadet who had said it was already over was quiet now. Everyone was quiet. The fourth charge was slower. Mira timed it differently. She went inside the limb trajectory instead of outside it, taking another hit, a hard one, across her back and shoulders, but using the creature's own momentum to press against its underside and deliver 3 successive strikes to the same nerve junction point. Harder this time, harder, and then a fourth that landed with everything she had left in her right arm. The Gorath stumbled, more than stumbled. It went to its front 4 limbs, and then the front 2 buckled and it went down, all of it. That enormous structure, 6 limbs folded, sensory cluster dropped to the arena floor, plates rattling against the sealed surface in a sound like a collapsed construction. The Gorath lay on the arena floor. Mira Shen stood over it. She was not in a triumphant stance. She did not raise anything. She was breathing. She was bleeding from somewhere above her left eyebrow. Her training suit had a tear across the back. She was standing, and the Gorath was not, and she looked at it for a moment with something in her expression that I could not identify at the time. I identified it later. It was respect. The 8-minute timer, which I had completely forgotten existed, had not expired. She had done it in 5 minutes and 40 seconds. The arena was silent. The entire observer level was silent. Doyle Fracas had stopped gripping the rail because both his hands were on top of his head and he was staring at the arena floor. Petra Voss was smiling in a way that was small and private, like she was the only one who had known this was possible and had been waiting patiently for everyone else to catch up. Kelthos moved. He did not walk fast. He never walked fast. But there was something different in his movement as he came down from the observer level and crossed the arena floor toward Mira. The Gorath was already beginning to recover, its legs moving in slow cycles, its sensory cluster lifting slightly, but Kelthos crossed past it without a second glance, which is the Vorathi behavioral equivalent of dismissal, and went directly to Mira. He stopped in front of her. He looked down at her. The height difference between them was significant. Mira looked up at him. "Cadet Shen," he said quietly. I was at the rail directly above, and I could hear him, because Kelthos speaks at a frequency that carries clearly even in low volume. It is not something he does intentionally. It is just how he is built. "Professor," she said. "How many times?" he said. "Have you done this before?" Mira looked at him evenly. "Done what?" "This," he said, and he gestured toward the Gorath on the floor. Mira was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Not this exactly. Different animals, same general situation." Kelthos processed that. "You have fought other non-sentient predators?" "Yes, Professor." "Earth," she said simply. He was quiet for 4 seconds again. 4 full seconds. Earth does not have organisms at this classification level. And Mira Shen said, very calmly, very evenly, the sentence that I have thought about many times since. "With respect, Professor, Earth has organisms that make this one look like a starting point." Kelthos looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back across the arena and up to the observer level. And he stood in front of 30 cadets who were all looking at him with the wide, stunned expressions of people who have just had a foundational assumption about the shape of the world revised without warning. Kelthos looked at us. The gold eyes moved. "What you observed today," he said, and his voice was exactly as even as always, "is not technique. Cadet Shen has technique, but technique is something any of you can acquire with sufficient work." He paused. What she demonstrated is something different. She demonstrated the decision not to stop under impact, under disorientation, under conditions that trigger every biological alarm system a body possesses. He looked along the rail. Most species stop when their body tells them to stop. This is not a failure of courage. It is a failure of override capacity. Another pause. The human species has an override capacity that I have encountered exactly 3 times in my 31 years of instruction. The Moradin cadets, who had come into this semester expecting to be the physical standard of the class, were very still. Tomorrow, Kelthos said, we begin practical assessments for the rest of you. I suggest you use tonight to recalibrate whatever assumptions you arrived with. His gold eyes landed on no one specifically and everyone generally. Dismissed. We walked back to the main building in a different kind of silence than the one we had walked out in. The first walk had been nervous silence, anticipatory silence, the silence of people bracing for something unpleasant. This was a different category entirely. This was the silence of a room after someone has changed the temperature and everyone is still adjusting to the new air. Doyle Fracas walked next to Mira and said absolutely nothing, which, from what I had observed of Doyle, was actually a significant statement. He just walked next to her. Petra was on her other side, still with that small private smile. Mira walked between them and looked slightly tired and was pressing 2 fingers to the cut above her eyebrow. The Moradin cadets did not say anything about the humans walking to the wrong building. The Krellians, whose perfect recall systems had presumably already indexed every moment of the past 5 minutes and 40 seconds and begun cross-referencing it against their existing threat assessments, were walking with slightly adjusted posture, subtle, but I noticed. I walked back to the main building thinking about Earth. I had never thought much about Earth before. Most species in the coalition do not spend significant time thinking about Earth. It is small. It is far from the primary coalition hubs. It is a moderately inhabited death world by classification, which means the baseline environmental conditions are hostile enough to qualify for the designation, but not extremely so. Not Dresha 4, not the Gorath Badlands, just a death world, mid-tier, unremarkable. That classification turns out to have a significant flaw, which is that it measures the environment without measuring what the environment produced. The environment of Earth is hostile enough to have spent 4 billion years killing everything that could not handle it. The things that survived that process, that climbed out of that particular filter and arrived at sentience, are not the things that gave up when their bodies said, "Stop." They are specifically and precisely the things that did not. They are the things that looked at something enormous and dangerous, and when the room went quiet and everyone looked away, raised their hand. And here is what stays with me, and what I have thought about on many evenings since that day in the arena. Mira Shen went back to being unremarkable after that session. She sat in the middle of the room. She took her notes by hand. She read everything twice. She did not develop a reputation for drama or performance. She did not become loud. She did not become the person everyone looked at. She just continued to be exactly what she had always been, which was something none of us had properly looked at. The difference was that now we looked. Nobody mocked the humans after that, not openly, not quietly. Not in the private whispers of the Moradin section or the filed-away assessments of the Krellians. Something had shifted in the calculation every species makes when it enters a new social environment, when it ranks and sorts and measures and files. The humans had been filed under unlikely. That file had been closed. And whatever replaced it did not have a label yet because the right label had not existed before. The right label was something like, "Watch carefully, do not make assumptions, and if the room goes quiet, pay attention to whoever is still moving." What the humans are, what Mira Shen demonstrated in 5 minutes and 40 seconds on a sealed arena floor against a creature that had hospitalized 12 cadets before her, is not raw strength. It is not advanced technique. It is not even intelligence, though they have that. It is the specific, strange, almost unreasonable of a species that evolved in a world that was trying to kill them every single day. And instead of being killed, decided to keep going. Not heroically, not dramatically. Just kept going because stopping was the other option, and stopping was not acceptable. That is what you are dealing with when you deal with humans. That is what the entire Interstellar Combat Academy learned from one quiet girl who raised her hand. The universe, I think, is still figuring out what to do with that information. So are we.